The cheap polyester of the security guard's uniform scraped against Dr. Alani Barrow's cheek, the scent of stale coffee and institutional soap filling her nostrils. It wasn't the fall that shocked her, it was the finality of the thud as her shoulder connected with the cold, unforgiving linoleum of the jet bridge. One moment she was a passenger in seat 2B of transatlantic air flight 712, the next she was debris. Inside the climate-controlled cabin, Julian Vance, the flight's lead purser, adjusted his silk tie, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He had successfully purged the cabin of a problem to accommodate a last-minute VIP. He was unaware that the woman lying discarded on the floor was not some disgruntled tourist. She was the architect of the very technology keeping his airline solvent. And the call she was about to make, with a trembling, bloodied finger, wasn't to customer service. It was to her chief financial officer, with a single two-word command that would initiate a financial maneuver so swift and so brutal, it would vaporize $4 billion of the airline's market value before the plane's landing gear even touched the tarmac in London. Julian Vance was about to learn that some passengers are not just flying. They are the gravity that holds the world together. The air in the first-class cabin of the Airbus A350 at Dulles International was a carefully curated fiction. It smelled of money, a subtle blend of fresh leather, hot towels infused with bergamot, and the crisp, effervescent promise of pre-departure champagne. It was a world away from the humid, chaotic energy of the boarding terminal, a sanctuary for those who paid a premium to forget they were being hurtled through the sky in a pressurized metal tube. Dr. Alani Barrow sat in her window seat, 2B, oblivious to the performance of luxury around her. To the casual observer, and more pointedly to the flight crew, she was an anomaly, a glitch in the cabin's expensive matrix. She wore a faded black hoodie from a long-defunct tech conference, cargo pants with a faint smudge of thermal paste on the knee, and a pair of worn-out hiking boots. Her hair was pulled back in a practical but messy twist, secured with a stray zip tie she'd found in her pocket earlier. She wasn't sipping champagne. Instead, she was hunched over a ruggedized tablet, its screen displaying a dense, labyrinthine schematic of a server network architecture. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips moving silently as she traced the data flow pathways with her finger. She was utterly exhausted. The past 96 hours had been a brutal, sleepless marathon in a cavernous, climate-controlled data center in rural Virginia. She had been on her hands and knees, personally supervising the final migration of Ethereum Dynamics' new quantum encryption protocols. The very protocols Transatlantic Air had just paid a 9-figure sum to license for their next-generation logistics and booking system. Alani wasn't just the CEO of Ethereum, she was its chief architect, a hands-on engineer who trusted her own eyes and hands more than any status report. The airline's future resilience against cyber attacks depended on the work she had just completed. But in this moment, she was not the titan of technology gracing the cover of Wired. She was simply Alani, a 48-year-old woman with an aching back who wanted nothing more than a bottle of water and 7 hours of uninterrupted silence. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice was a weapon, wrapped in velvet but honed to a sharp, condescending edge. It sliced through her concentration, setting her teeth on edge. Alani looked up, blinking to adjust her focus from the screen. Standing over her was Julian Vance, the lead purser. He was a man who seemed poured into his uniform, every crease sharp, every button gleaming. His hair was a lacquered sculpture, and his smile was a masterpiece of insincerity, a baring of teeth that never reached his cold, appraising eyes. He held a sleek airline-issued tablet, tapping a manicured finger against its edge. "Yes?" Alani's voice was hoarse, a dry rasp from hours of disuse. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again, if you don't mind." It was phrased as a request, but delivered as a command. Alani sighed, a weary gust of air. The wide leather seat suddenly felt constricting. "I showed it to the agent at the gate, and then again to the attendant at the door." "I'm aware of that," Julian said, his voice rising just enough to snag the attention of the man in 2A, a hedge fund manager who was aggressively typing on his laptop. "However, we seem to have a slight irregularity with our seating manifest. It's just a formality." With a growing sense of irritation, Alani reached into the deep pocket of her cargo pants and produced the boarding pass. It was slightly crumpled. She handed it to him. Julian took it between his thumb and forefinger as if handling a soiled tissue. He glanced at it, then at his tablet, then back at her, his perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together in a performance of profound confusion. Seat 2B, Barrow? Peculiar. What's peculiar about it? Alani asked, her posture straightening. The familiar, unpleasant burn of adrenaline began to cut through her fatigue. This was a pattern she recognized, a social algorithm she'd seen run 1,000 times in boardrooms and investor meetings. It's just, well, Julian lowered his voice, leaning in with a conspiratorial air that was somehow more insulting than shouting. Our premium cabin is typically occupied by our Centurion-level members or those on full-fare corporate contracts. This ticket, it appears to have been booked through a third-party portal, and with a significant discount code. It was booked through my company's corporate travel portal, Alani corrected him, her voice level and cold. Ethereum Dynamics, we have a direct corporate account with this airline. There was no discount code. Julian's smile tightened. Ethereum Dynamics. Right. Look, Ms. Barrow, I'm just going to need you to wait here for a moment. We're having a slight issue with aircraft trim. We may need to reseat you for weight and balance purposes. Reseat me? Alani's gaze sharpened. This is an A350-1000. My moving from this seat is not going to affect the plane's center of gravity. Are you claiming your aircraft's operational envelope is that narrow? She had used technical language deliberately, a small test. The purser's mask of civility slipped. The reference went straight over his head. It's a figure of speech, ma'am, an operational requirement. Please, just remain seated. He turned and walked away, her boarding pass still in his hand. Alani watched him go, a cold knot forming in her stomach. She knew exactly what was happening. It was the clothes, the hoodie, the zip tie in her hair. He had run his social calculus, and the result came back. Not one of us. Does not belong here. She considered for a fleeting second, pulling out her phone and showing him the press release from yesterday announcing Ethereum's multi-billion-dollar partnership with his own airline. But why should she have to? She had paid nearly $8,000 for this seat. Her right to be there was encoded on the ticket, not on her net worth or her C-suite title. She was a customer. That should have been enough. A few minutes later, a new set of characters made their entrance, creating a small vortex of commotion near the galley. A young man, no older than 25, strode into the cabin. He was draped in a Balenciaga jacket that looked artfully disheveled and wore sunglasses indoors. He was flanked by a harried-looking assistant who was juggling 2 phones and a leather portfolio. This was Carter Sterling, the notoriously profligate son of Richard Sterling, the CEO of Transatlantic Air. Alani recognized him from gossip sites, usually pictured spilling out of a Maybach or on a yacht in Ibiza. "Julian, for God's sake, what is the hold-up?" Carter announced to the cabin, his voice a loud, petulant bray. He tossed his jacket in the general direction of a flight attendant without making eye contact. "My father was explicit. I get a window seat. I need to see the curvature of the earth for my Insta story. It's a whole vibe." Julian's rigid posture melted into a puddle of obsequious deference. "Mr. Sterling, my sincerest apologies. A minor ticketing error at the gate. The ground staff can be so incompetent. We are rectifying the situation as we speak." "Rectify it faster," Carter snapped, already composing a post on his phone. "I have a live stream to start before we take off. My followers are waiting." Julian spun on his heel and marched back to Alani, his face now a grim mask of purpose. The pretense was over. The charade was done. Alani watched the pathetic drama unfold with a sense of detached weariness. So this was the operational requirement. The CEO's son wanted her seat for his social media content. The irony was corrosive. Richard Sterling had personally courted her for months, promising a partnership built on mutual respect and technological synergy. He had called her a visionary. Now his airline was treating her like a trespasser to placate his spoiled child. Julian loomed over her seat. "Ms. Barrow, I'm afraid there's been a complication. The system has flagged your ticket as a fraudulent booking." "Fraudulent?" The word hung in the air between them, cold and sharp. "On what grounds?" "It's a system glitch," Julian lied, the words flowing with practiced ease. "A duplicate seat assignment. It happens. "We found you a very comfortable seat in our premium economy cabin. Row 15. It has excellent legroom." "I am not moving," Alani said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She stated it as a law of the universe, an immutable fact. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you have no choice," Julian hissed, leaning closer, his breath smelling of mints and condescension. "This seat is reserved for Mr. Sterling. He's a Centurion Black card holder. You are, well, you're not even in our loyalty program." "That's because my company doesn't chase points, Mr. Vance," Alani said, her eyes flicking to his name tag. "We chase results, and I have a contract with your airline for passage in this specific seat. I suggest you inform Mr. Sterling that seat 2B is and will remain occupied." A dark flush crept up Julian's neck. "Listen to me, you lady. The cabin door is closing in 5 minutes. You can either walk to row 15 with your dignity, or I can have you physically removed from this aircraft. And if you are removed, you won't be going to London. You'll be going to a federal holding cell." Alani looked past the purser's furious face to where Carter Sterling was now taking a selfie, pouting at his phone. She then met Julian's eyes again. "Make the call, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "But I promise you, on everything my name stands for, it will be the last command you ever give on this airline." Julian straightened up, a look of righteous fury on his face. "You brought this on yourself." He tapped the small communication device in his ear. "Captain, Julian here. We have a non-compliant passenger in first class, refusing to follow crew instructions. Yes, she's becoming aggressive. I'm going to need security at the gate, immediately." The mood in the cabin curdled. The quiet hum of anticipation was replaced by a tense electric silence. The other passengers, who had been trying their best to pretend nothing was happening, were now staring openly. A few phones began to emerge, their lenses catching the light. Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit. He was an older man, with the weathered face and air of calm authority that airlines cultivated in their senior pilots. He didn't look at Alani. His focus was entirely on his lead purser. "What's the issue, Julian?" "She's refusing to vacate a seat that was double-booked, Captain," Julian said, playing the part of the beleaguered professional. "I've explained the situation and offered her alternative accommodation, but she's being belligerent and disruptive." "Belligerent?" Alani repeated the word, a single eyebrow raised. She was still seated, her hands resting on the armrests. "Captain, I have not raised my voice. I have not made a threat. I am simply refusing to surrender the seat I paid for so you can give it to the CEO's son." Captain Miller finally turned his gaze on her. He saw the worn hoodie, the tired face, the lack of jewelry. He performed the same flawed calculation as his purser. He saw a problem to be solved quickly, not a person to be respected. "Ma'am, on my aircraft, the instructions of my flight crew are not negotiable. They carry the weight of federal law," he said, his voice a stern baritone. "You are interfering with the duties of the crew. We have a departure slot to make. Get your bag and deplane." "Captain Miller," Alani said, reading his name from the plaque on his uniform. "Before you do this, I strongly advise you to check the corporate partner annotation attached to my passenger name record. The code should be 8th DYNQ prime." "I don't care if it's marked Angel of God," the captain snapped, his patience gone. Carter Sterling was now complaining loudly to another flight attendant about the delay. "You are holding up this flight. Get off my plane." "No," Alani said, her voice quiet but absolute. 2 uniformed airport police officers appeared at the aircraft door, their presence sucking the remaining warmth from the cabin. They carried the metallic clink of utility belts and the heavy aura of state-sanctioned force. "Gentlemen," Julian said, stepping back with a theatrical flourish, "the disruptive passenger is right here. Failure to comply with crew instructions." The lead officer, a large man with a weary expression, approached her. "Ma'am, let's not make this a scene. Just grab your things and come with us." "I have a legal right to be in this seat," Alani stated, her heart beginning to pound against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath her calm exterior. "This is discriminatory and unlawful." "It's a seat reassignment," Julian shouted, his composure finally shattering. "Get her out of here." Carter Sterling sauntered over, a glass of champagne in his hand, which a junior attendant had nervously fetched for him. "Hey, officers," he slurred slightly. "Can we speed this up? My father, Richard Sterling, is expecting me in London for a board meeting. This woman is jeopardizing international commerce." The officer's jaw tightened at the mention of the CEO's name. He wanted this over. "Ma'am, this is your final warning," he said, his hand moving towards his belt. "Stand up and leave the aircraft." Alani looked at the officer's tired eyes. She looked at Julian's face, contorted with a petty, triumphant rage. She looked at the captain, who had already turned his back, retreating to the sterile safety of the cockpit. And she looked at Carter Sterling, who was smirking at her over the rim of his glass. "I will not," she said. The officer nodded to his partner. "Take her." The assault was brutally efficient. The first officer grabbed her right arm, twisting it behind her back in a practiced, painful hold. The other grabbed her left shoulder. They didn't help her up. They hauled her, a dead weight, from the seat. A sharp, searing pain shot through her collarbone. "Ow! Stop!" she cried out, the sound swallowed by the cabin's hush. "Stop resisting," one of the officers grunted, though she wasn't fighting back, merely trying to stay upright as they manhandled her into the aisle. Her ruggedized tablet, her life's work contained in its circuits, slipped from her lap and crashed to the floor, the screen spiderwebbing into 1,000 fractured lines. Carter Sterling laughed, a short, ugly bark of a laugh. "Oops, guess she'll have to buy a new one." "You're hurting me," Alani gasped as they shoved her forward, her shoulder banging hard against a seatback. "You should have moved when you were told," Julian snarled from the galley, his voice dripping with venom. They dragged her up the aisle. Her boot caught on the leg of a seat, and she stumbled, her ankle twisting. She was a spectacle of humiliation, a procession of one, paraded before a silent audience of the wealthy and powerful. Phones were up everywhere now, their small red recording lights like a constellation of malevolent eyes. "This is barbaric," a woman in row 3 shouted. "She's done nothing wrong." "You're next if you don't sit down and shut up." Julian pointed a trembling finger at the woman. They reached the aircraft door. The cool jet fuel-scented air of the jet bridge was a shock to her skin. They didn't stop. They shoved her out onto the ramp. The lead officer, losing his grip, gave her a final violent push to get her clear of the doorway. Alani's feet tangled, and she fell, sprawling onto the grimy floor of the jet bridge. The impact sent a blinding, white-hot agony through her shoulder and wrist. She lay there, the world a dizzying, painful blur. Above her, framed in the doorway of the aircraft, Julian Vance looked down. He smoothed his tie, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. "Have a wonderful day," he said, his voice oozing sarcasm. He turned to the gate agent. "Close it up." The heavy door swung shut with a pneumatic hiss, the locking mechanism engaging with a series of deafening final clicks. The light and the warmth were gone. Alani was alone on the cold metal floor with 2 panting officers and the smell of her own humiliation. "All right, on your feet," the lead officer grunted. "You're under arrest, interfering with a flight crew, trespassing, resisting." Alani didn't move for a long moment. She took a breath, then another. The pain was a physical thing, a fire in her bones, but something else was rising through it. A cold, crystalline rage, so pure and so potent it felt like a superpower. Slowly, with her uninjured hand, she reached into her pocket. Her phone was still there, the screen miraculously intact. "I said, put the phone away," the officer warned, taking a step toward her. She ignored him. Wiping a trickle of blood from her lip, with the back of her hand, she unlocked the phone. She didn't open her call log to find a lawyer. She opened a secure, encrypted application. She selected a contact labeled simply M. Thorne, execute. As the secure connection was established, Alani pushed herself into a sitting position. She looked up at the officer, her dark eyes now burning with an intensity that made him instinctively recoil. "Officer," she said, her voice a low, dangerous rasp, "you and your friend here should start praying for engine failure. Because if that plane reaches its destination, the company that owns it will be nothing but a memory." The line connected. A calm, measured voice answered, "Alani, I thought you were wheels up. Is everything all right?" "Marcus," Alani said, and her voice was the sound of grinding ice. "It's time. Activate Protocol Umbra." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Alani, what's happened? Protocol Umbra? That's..." That's the hostile acquisition framework. That's for taking over a competitor, not for a travel delay. I'm not delayed, Marcus. I've been assaulted and thrown off a transatlantic air flight, she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. By order of the CEO's son. They broke my tablet. I think they broke my collarbone. So we are no longer their partner, we are their executioner. Alani, this is insane, Marcus pleaded. The markets are volatile. A move like this could backfire. We could lose billions. They started this, Alani whispered, staring at the sealed aircraft door. I'm going to finish it. I want you to start buying up their convertible debt. All of it. Use the holding companies in Dublin and Singapore. Then I want you to execute the margin calls on every loan we hold of their primary creditors. I want their credit lines frozen solid by the time I get out of this airport. I want Richard Sterling's phone to melt in his hand. Do you understand me, Marcus? There was a long, heavy silence. Then Marcus's voice returned, all hesitation gone, replaced by a chilling efficiency. Yes, Dr. Barrow, I understand perfectly. Initiating Protocol Umbra. Estimated time to credit seizure, 90 minutes. God help them. Alani ended the call. She looked at her broken reflection in the dark screen of her phone. The bleeding had mostly stopped. The rage had now settled into a terrifying calm. She had built an empire on logic, code, and the relentless pursuit of a better future. Now she would use that same empire to tear another one down to its foundations. The holding area in the airport's substation was a small, sour-smelling room designed to strip a person of their identity. The walls were cinder block painted a nauseating shade of pale green. A single metal bench was bolted to the floor, its surface cold and unyielding. Alani sat on it, a silent, composed figure of pain and fury. Her left arm was cradled against her chest. A deep, throbbing ache radiated from her collarbone, confirming her suspicion of a fracture. The two officers, whose names she now knew were Kowalski and Diaz, had processed her with a bored, detached cruelty, confiscating her satchel and logging her as Jane Doe because she had refused to speak to them further. Officer Kowalski sat at a battered metal desk, typing her report with 2 fingers, a smug look on his face. To him, this was just another Tuesday. Another troublemaker neutralized. You know, you could have had a nice seat in coach, he offered, not looking up from his screen. A little bag of pretzels, a ginger ale. But you had to make a federal case out of it. Now you're looking at a felony charge and a 10-year ban from every airline in the country. Was it worth it, lady? Alani didn't answer. She was watching an imaginary stock ticker in her mind's eye, the price of transatlantic air, TAA, plummeting with every tick of the clock on the wall. She was calculating leveraged debt ratios and the cascading effect of a sudden credit freeze. The pain was a distant signal. The primary process running in her mind was pure, cold vengeance. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the corridor flew open with such force it slammed against the wall. A man in a flawlessly tailored Tom Ford suit stormed in, his face a mask of controlled panic. He was followed by 2 other men who looked less like lawyers and more like former Special Forces operatives. "Where is she?" the man in the suit demanded, his eyes scanning the room. Kowalski jumped to his feet. "Hey, this is a restricted area. Who the hell are you?" The man ignored him completely. His eyes landed on Alani. A wave of profound relief, mixed with horror, washed over his features. "Dr. Barrow, oh thank God." He rushed to the bars of the small holding cell. "Alani, it's David Chen from Legal. Marcus called me. Are you all right? They said you were injured." "My clavicle is likely fractured, David," Alani said, her voice flat. "And they destroyed my prototype tablet. I need you to secure the jet bridge. It's a crime scene now. I want every frame of CCTV footage from the gate to this room." Kowalski and Diaz exchanged a confused look. "Dr. Barrow?" Diaz repeated. David Chen turned his attention to the 2 officers, and the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. "You are Officers Kowalski and Diaz?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are the 2 individuals who physically assaulted the CEO and chief architect of Ethereum Dynamics, a woman with a personal net worth greater than the GDP of a small country." Kowalski's smug expression dissolved into slack-jawed disbelief. He looked at Alani, at her worn-out hoodie and cargo pants, and then back at the impeccably dressed lawyer. The pieces were not fitting together in his world view. She was causing a disturbance on a plane. She was sitting in the $8,000 seat she purchased, Chen snapped, and you dragged her out of it like an animal. I have a message for you from the airport authority director, who is currently having a complete nervous breakdown in his office. You are both suspended, effective immediately. Surrender your badges and your sidearms. You will be the subject of an internal affairs investigation and a multi-hundred-million-dollar civil lawsuit that I will be filing personally within the hour. Kowalski's face went pale. He looked at Alani, truly seeing her for the first time. The quiet intensity, the unnerving calm. It wasn't belligerence. It was power. Unimaginable power. Alani stood up slowly, the pain causing her to wince. She walked to the cell door, which Chen was now frantically unlocking. She stepped out and stopped directly in front of Kowalski. You asked me if it was worth it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The answer is yes. Your pension fund is heavily invested in airline and transportation stocks, isn't it, officer? I'd suggest you call your financial advisor. She turned to her lawyer. David, get me out of here. I need a secure line and a medical team. Marcus has work to do, and he's going to need my authorization for the next phase. While Alani was being examined by a private doctor in the airport's VIP lounge, the digital world was erupting. A young tech vlogger on his way to a conference in London had been sitting in row 4. He hadn't just filmed the assault, he recognized Alani Barrow from her keynote speeches. He even recognized the schematics for a quantum network on her tablet screen before it was smashed. He uploaded the video not to TikTok, but to a forum for high-level tech executives and venture capitalists, with the title, Transatlantic Air CEO's son has Dr. Alani Barrow, Ethereum Dynamics, violently removed from flight so he can have her seat. The effect was not just viral, it was cataclysmic. This wasn't just a video of a passenger being mistreated. This was an attack on one of their own, a revered icon of innovation. The video spread from the private forum to X, LinkedIn, and every major news network's tip line within minutes. The context made it 1,000 times more damning. The hashtag Jark Ethereum Airways began trending globally. At 40,000 feet over the Atlantic, the cabin of Flight 712 was an island of ignorance. Carter Sterling was live streaming to his followers, complaining about the turbulence. Julian Vance was in the galley, boasting to a junior flight attendant about how he'd expertly handled a deranged homeless woman who had somehow slipped into first class. They were blissfully unaware that the ground had collapsed beneath them. In the Dallas headquarters of Transatlantic Air, CEO Richard Sterling was in the middle of a quarterly earnings call, painting a rosy picture of the company's future, anchored by their new partnership with Ethereum Dynamics. His phone, set to silent, began to vibrate on the polished mahogany table. It vibrated once, then again, then began to vibrate continuously, buzzing like an angry hornet. His chief communications officer, a young woman named Chloe, burst into the boardroom, her face the color of chalk. She slid a tablet in front of him. On the screen was the video. He saw his son, Carter, laughing. He saw Julian Vance, his airline's most senior purser, sneering, and he saw the woman being dragged. The blood had drained from Richard Sterling's face, leaving behind a waxy, translucent mask of a man who had just witnessed his own obituary being written in real time. He didn't drop the phone. His hand, locked in a rigor of shock, simply opened, letting the device clatter onto the polished mahogany of the boardroom table. The voice of his Goldman Sachs banker, a tinny squawk of panic, was cut short. The boardroom, moments ago a theater of corporate self-congratulation, was now a vacuum. The air itself seemed to have been sucked out, leaving only the oppressive hum of the climate control and the frantic, silent blinking of the breaking news banner on the wall-mounted screen. Transatlantic Air, TAA, stock halted. Plummets 65% in after hours. Trading amidst assault allegations from Ethereum CEO. The words were not just letters, they were tombstones, each one marking the death of a decade of his life. He saw the video again in his mind's eye, a flickering, hellish loop. His son's idiotic, champagne-fueled laughter, Julian Vance's sneering, petty triumph, and the face of Alani Barrow, a woman he had called a visionary, being slammed against a seatback. He had built an empire on the perception of luxury, safety, and prestige. In 90 seconds of grainy mobile phone footage, his son and his most senior purser had revealed the truth. The foundation was rotten, infested with a culture of arrogance so profound it had mistaken a titan for a vagrant. This wasn't a PR crisis. PR crises were fires you could contain, smother with money, and carefully worded apologies. This was a supernova. Alani Barrow wasn't filing a lawsuit to be settled out of court. She was calling in an orbital strike. The margin calls, the debt conversion, it was a language he understood intimately. It was the sound of a corporate predator disemboweling its prey. She wasn't attacking his stock price, she was seizing the arteries that supplied blood to the entire organism. "Get me the captain of Flight 7112, Sterling choked out, the words tearing at his throat. His voice was a stranger's, a dry, rattling whisper. Now. His chief communications officer, Chloe, was already moving. Her face a pale blur of efficiency, but her eyes held the terrified look of someone on the deck of a sinking ship. The call was irrelevant, Sterling knew, a futile gesture. What could he say? Turn the plane around? He was no longer in command. He was just a man in an expensive suit, watching a ghost at a keyboard dismantle 30 years of his life, one line of code at a time. Back at Dulles, the executive conference room they had commandeered felt less like a command center and more like a field hospital after a battle. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic from the medic's kit and the low murmur of lawyers speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Alani sat at the head of the long table, a sterile white sling cradling her left arm. The throbbing in her collarbone was a dull, persistent drumbeat, a physical anchor to the abstract digital cataclysm she had unleashed. On the large screen before her, Marcus Thorne's face was a study in grim focus, the secure video link piping him in from Ethereum's primary network operations center. "Phase 1 is complete, Alani," Marcus reported, his voice devoid of triumph, laced only with the awe of a man watching a force of nature he had helped unleash. "Their operational credit is gone, their corporate accounts are frozen solid. They can't pay for fuel, landing fees, or catering. We've converted the bonds. We now effectively own a controlling interest in their debt. They are, for all intents and purposes, insolvent." "Good," Alani said. The word felt small, inadequate. She looked at her right hand, resting on the cool surface of the table. It was the hand that had typed the initial command. It didn't look any different. She had expected to feel a surge of victory, a righteous fire. Instead, she felt a profound and unsettling coldness. It was the detached calm of a surgeon who has just completed a radical, disfiguring amputation to save a life. Or perhaps to end one. "Phase 2, she continued, her voice a monotone that betrayed none of the turmoil within. "Prepare a tender offer. We're buying the airline, the whole entity. Offer 20 cents on the dollar to the remaining shareholders. With the stock in freefall and their board facing a tidal wave of liability lawsuits, they'll bite. I want the offer on Richard Sterling's desk by morning." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. The sheer audacity of it seemed to finally break through his professional composure. "We're going to own an airline, Alani. We're a tech company. We build encryption protocols and logistics software." "We're going to own a global logistics network," Alani corrected him, the vision suddenly crystallizing in her mind, sharp and clear, a beacon in the fog of her own rage. "The planes are just the delivery system, the hardware. We've been trying to sell them our software for years. Now we'll own the entire stack. We'll gut the executive management, tear down the toxic culture, and rebuild it from the ground up, integrated with our own infrastructure. Transatlantic air is dead. Ethereum Airways is about to be born." A soft knock at the door preceded the entry of a terrified-looking vice president of customer relations from Transatlantic Air. He was a man in his late 50s, sweating through an expensive suit, his face etched with the desperation of someone sent to negotiate with a hurricane. He clutched a leather portfolio to his chest like a shield. "Dr. Barrow," he began, his voice trembling, "I am Harrison Croft. On behalf of Mr. Sterling, the board of directors, and the entire airline, we offer our most profound, our most sincere apologies. This was a catastrophic, unforgivable error in judgment by a few rogue employees." Alani watched him, her expression unreadable. She didn't help him. She let him twist in the wind of his own scripted panic. "We are prepared to offer you an immediate and substantial settlement," Croft stammered, fumbling with his portfolio. $50 million, tax-free, and lifetime private jet travel for you, your family, your executive staff. Anything you want. We will fire everyone involved, publicly. All we ask, all we humbly request, is that you sign a non-disclosure agreement and work with us on a joint statement about this being a regrettable but isolated misunderstanding. Alani stared at the man for a long, silent moment. She saw in his eyes the same fundamental miscalculation that Julian Vance and Captain Miller had made, the belief that everything and everyone had a price. That dignity was a commodity to be bought and sold. A flicker of something that might have been pity, or perhaps just profound weariness, crossed her face. She slowly shook her head. "You think this is about money?" she asked, her voice soft, yet carrying the weight of the entire room. "You think this is a negotiation?" "Mr. Croft, your lead purser, acting as an agent of your company, informed me that my right to occupy a seat I purchased was superseded by the social status of another passenger. Your captain, the ultimate authority on that vessel, ratified that decision. 2 of your security contractors then physically assaulted me under the color of that authority. This wasn't a rogue employee, it was a mission statement. You didn't just assault a passenger, you assaulted a partner. You broke a contract of trust that was far more valuable than the 9-figure licensing deal we signed. You showed the world that your culture is a terminal illness." She leaned forward, the slight movement causing Croft to flinch. "So no, I don't want your money. I'm going to take your company. It's the only way to be sure the disease doesn't spread. Tell Richard Sterling to check his inbox in the morning. My offer will be there. It will be my only offer." She stood, the gesture an undeniable dismissal. The pain in her collarbone flared, a sharp reminder of the cost of this education. "And tell him I'm renaming his flagship A380. It's going to be called the Audacity." As the sun bled across the horizon, painting the cloudscape in bruised shades of purple and orange, Flight 712 began its descent. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin was one of blissful ignorance. Carter Sterling was loudly recounting a story about a party in Mykonos to a rapt junior flight attendant. Julian Vance was in the galley, meticulously polishing a wine glass, feeling a deep, warm sense of professional satisfaction. He had protected the brand. He had catered to a VIP. He had swiftly and efficiently removed a disruptive element. He was already composing the commendation email he expected to receive from corporate in his head. In the cockpit, however, the world was ending. The ACARS printer, the flight deck's data linked to the ground, began to chatter, spitting out a series of urgent telexes that were unlike anything Captain Miller had ever seen. The messages weren't from TAA dispatch. The routing code was unfamiliar. 8th in Cuttrell, Ethereum control. FLT 712, TAA OPS FREC, no longer secure. Communicate this FREC only. FLT 712, divert to Stansted Airport, STN. Do not proceed to LHR. LHR landing fees unpaid. FLT 712, upon arrival at STN, proceed to isolated stand 99. Await instructions. FLT 712, expect Ethereum security and UK authorities meet at aircraft. Do not open cabin doors until cleared by Ethereum ground control. This is a mandatory, legally binding directive under Debt Covenant, 1138B. Captain Miller stared at the flimsy strips of paper, his blood turning to ice water in his veins. Landing fees unpaid, Ethereum control, Debt Covenant. This wasn't an operational diversion, this was a repossession. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, crept up his spine. He had spent his entire career cocooned in the absolute authority of the captain's chair. That authority, he now realized, was a privilege granted by a vast, complex financial machine. And someone had just thrown a wrench into its gears. He forced his trembling fingers to type a query into the company's private newsfeed on his flight deck laptop. The screen filled with headlines about his flight, his airline, and a name that now seemed to be branded on the inside of his skull. Dr. Alani Barrow. He saw the video. He saw his own face, a mask of dismissive, arrogant impatience, as he uttered the words, "Get off my plane." "My God," he whispered, the words lost in the hum of the avionics. "What have we done?" He finally pulled up the passenger manifest, his eyes finding seat 2B. He tapped the screen to expand the passenger name record, looking for the annotation he had so arrogantly ignored hours earlier. ETH Dian Q Prime. A small hyperlink was attached. He clicked it. It opened a secure document, a copy of the multi-billion-dollar partnership agreement between Transatlantic Air and Ethereum Dynamics. Attached was a rider, a clause he'd never seen before, personally negotiated by Alani Barrow. It stipulated that in the event of a material breach of contract, defined in excruciating detail to include acts that brought either party into public disrepute, Ethereum had the right to call in all outstanding debt and assume temporary operational control of joint assets. The flight itself was a joint asset, running on Ethereum's newly installed logistics software. He had not just ejected a passenger. He had personally triggered the self-destruct sequence for his entire company. He looked at his first officer, a young, eager man whose career he had just incinerated. He had flown the most expensive flight in the history of commercial aviation, and the price of the ticket was everything. The Airbus A350 touched down at Stansted with the eerie grace of a ghost ship. Instead of taxiing to a terminal bustling with life, it was guided by a police escort to a remote, floodlit corner of the airfield, a place reserved for cargo planes and quarantined flights. The engines spooled down into a profound and terrible silence. "What's this all about?" Carter Sterling demanded, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "This isn't Heathrow. My driver is at Heathrow. I'm going to have someone's job for this. This is completely unacceptable." The cabin door was opened not by ground staff, but by three stone-faced individuals in dark tactical gear with Ethereum security stenciled on their vests. They were followed by a man in a crisp suit, holding a tablet. "All passengers are to remain seated with their hands in sight," the lead security officer commanded, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. The man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes scanning the cabin before landing on Julian Vance. "I am David Chen, Chief Counsel for Ethereum Dynamics." "Mr. Vance?" Julian, who had been standing by the galley, ready to perform his arrival duties, felt his knees turn to water. He managed a pathetic, shaky nod. "Julian Vance," Chen said, his voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. "You are being served with a civil complaint for damages totaling $200 million for your role in the assault of Dr. Alani Barrow. Furthermore, under the provisions of the Aviation and Maritime Security Act, your purser's license is hereby suspended pending a full investigation. You are to surrender your credentials and deplane immediately. UK law enforcement is waiting for you on the jet bridge to discuss the matter of your international arrest warrant." Julian's face crumpled. A babbling, incoherent protest died in his throat as two of the security officers flanked him. His world, built on a fragile scaffolding of rules and status, had just collapsed. Chen's gaze then moved, landing on the CEO's son. "Mr. Sterling, Carter Sterling." "You can't touch me," Carter sneered, though a tremor of fear was now visible in his eyes. "My father is Richard Sterling. He owns this airline." Chen allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Your father is currently in negotiations to surrender his company to avoid complete liquidation. He no longer owns this seat, let alone the plane. Your diplomatic visa, which we see was fast-tracked as a consultant for the airline, has been revoked by the US State Department at our request. You will be detained and deported. Before that, however, you'll be speaking with detectives from the National Crime Agency. It seems a forensic audit of your father's corporate accounts, initiated about 4 hours ago, has revealed a series of rather creative transactions, all traceable to your personal accounts. Wire fraud is the term, I believe." "You can't arrest me," Carter shrieked as he was hauled from his seat, his bravado shattering into raw panic. "My father will destroy you." "Not anymore, son," Chen said, his voice flat. "He doesn't." 6 months later, Alani stood alone in the cockpit of a newly christened Ethereum Airways A350. The plane was parked in a cavernous hangar that still smelled faintly of new paint and ionized air. The old transatlantic livery was gone, replaced by a sleek silver and charcoal design that incorporated the Ethereum Mobius strip into the tail fin. The cabin was being refitted with next-generation connectivity suites, but the flight deck was her sanctuary. She ran her hand over the cool, smooth plastic of the side stick, the instrument panel dark and silent before her. Her arm was long out of the sling, but on quiet mornings she could still feel a phantom ache in her collarbone, a faint silvery scar, the only visible reminder. The rage had long since cooled, leaving behind something heavier, more complex. She had won. The victory had been total, absolute. Richard Sterling was a disgraced recluse, his fortune devoured by lawsuits and SEC penalties. Julian Vance was serving an 18-month sentence for aggravated assault. Carter Sterling, convicted of fraud, was discovering that the vibe in a minimum security prison was considerably less appealing than on a yacht in Ibiza. She had torn down an empire, but the weight of building a new one in its place was immense. For every corrupt executive she had purged, there had been a dozen decent, hard-working employees caught in the crossfire, their pensions and careers thrown into chaos. The acquisition had not been a clean, surgical strike. It had been a brutal, bloody war of attrition fought in boardrooms and bankruptcy courts. There were nights she woke up, the cold dread of what she had done sitting on her chest, wondering if the cure had been worse than the disease. Had she become the very thing she sought to destroy, a ruthless force of nature, remaking the world in her own image without regard for the human cost? The soft scuff of shoes on the cockpit floor broke her reverie. She turned. It was Captain Miller. He was not in uniform. He wore a simple pilot's polo shirt and slacks. His face was leaner, the lines around his eyes deeper. The air of command was gone, replaced by a quiet, weary humility. "Dr. Barrow," he said, his voice respectful. "Mr. Miller," she replied, her tone neutral. He had been fired along with the rest of the senior staff, his career in commercial aviation over. Yet she had requested this meeting. "I wanted to apologize," he began, his gaze fixed on the instrument panel, unable to meet her eyes. "Not for my career. I deserved to lose it. But for what I did. There is no excuse. I was the captain. I had a duty of care to every soul on that plane, and I failed you. I saw what I wanted to see, a problem, not a person. And I will live with that for the rest of my life." Alani listened, her expression unreadable. "You had a choice, Captain. You could have taken 30 seconds to verify the information. You could have chosen to de-escalate. You chose the path of least resistance. You deferred to the purser's prejudice and the CEO's son's entitlement because it was easier than doing the right thing." "Yes," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It was." "That's the culture I'm trying to eradicate," Alani said, turning to look out the cockpit window at the sprawling airfield. "The culture of the easy way out, the deference to authority without question, the assumption that a person's worth is written on their clothes or their credit card." She paused, then turned back to him. "I'm not offering you your command back. You can never sit in this seat again. But I am offering you a new role, head of situational awareness and human factors for our new flight academy. I need someone to teach a new generation of pilots how to see the whole picture. How to recognize that the most dangerous turbulence is often the kind that happens in the cabin, not outside of it. I need someone who understands, from bitter experience, the cost of getting it wrong." Miller looked at her, stunned, his eyes welling with tears he refused to let fall. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something far more valuable. It was a purpose. "Why?" he managed to ask. "Because I don't believe people are disposable," Alani said simply. "I believe in fixing broken systems. And sometimes that means salvaging the parts that can still be of use." Later that day, she walked the floor of the main hangar. She had traded her executive dress for her familiar black hoodie and cargo pants. She was surrounded by engineers, her people, deep in a discussion about the efficiency of a new engine turbine design. The young tech vlogger who had filmed the video was now her head of social media and customer transparency, and he was walking with her, filming a live stream for employees. "Our first new aircraft," he said, panning his phone's camera across the massive plane, "has a name. The flagship of the new Ethereum Airways. Can you tell us what it is, Dr. Barrow?" Alani stopped beside the nose of the plane, placing a hand on its cool metal skin. She looked into the camera, not with the triumphant glare of a conqueror, but with the steady, focused gaze of a builder. "We're calling her the Audacity," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in months. "Because it's audacious to believe you can rebuild a broken culture. It's audacious to believe that dignity isn't a luxury item. And it's audacious to believe that a person in a hoodie has just as much right to touch the sky as anyone else. We fell from a great height 6 months ago. Today we start the climb back up. Let's get to work."